Good evening, everyone. It's Monday, August 22nd, 2022. It's time for our regularly scheduled city council meeting. Ask the clerk to certify the meeting notice.
This meeting has been noticed in accordance with Idaho Code 74-204.
Thank you. Clerk, call the roll.
Councilmember Heller,
Present.
Councilmember Jacobs,
Yes.
Councilmember Jorgensen,
Yes.
Councilmember Page.
Here.
Thank you. Next item is Pledge of Allegiance.
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice.
Item D is changes to the agenda.
Mr. Mayor,
Yes, sir.
under item J, I'd like to request a brief executive session after the meeting, during which time no decision will be made.
Okay, under which section of code? You have that? We can look it up if we need to.
Council for the public agency. I forget what the code number is. I can. You have it.
Okay, I'll find it. Okay. Okay. Okay,
I can find it.
so we've got an executive session on the agenda. We just need to add the code reference. Okay, any objection? Seeing none, we'll go ahead and add that. Next item is the consent agenda.
Mr. Mayor,
Yes.
I move that we approve the consent agenda as written.
Second. Thank you. Got a motion and a second to approve the consent agenda. Is there any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Next item is special business. This is an action item. The number one is authorization for a grant of $3,000 to the Garden City Visitors Bureau. Background on this, I got a request from the Visitors Bureau. The purpose of the grant would be to help with the economic development effort they're underway through the a video presentation that they are participating in that will promote the city. I indicated to them that I would put it on the agenda and let the council discuss it. If you want some more detail, I can probably have a member come at our next meeting. To me, it seemed like a reasonable request, given the amount of work and the effort that they have been doing for the last several years to not only promote the city, but to represent the city in a very positive light. Any discussion or questions on that?
Mr. Mayor,
Yes.
I would only add that I have been observing from the sidelines the Visitors Bureau's efforts, and particularly the communication efforts that they are also working in conjunction with the Chamber of Commerce, the Garden City Chamber of Commerce. And I endorse and am in favor of providing this grant, and I have no further need to invite them here for further explanation. It's a nominal amount.
Thank you. Any further comments? Councilmember Jorgensen, would you like to make a motion?
Mr. Mayor, I'd move that we authorize a grant of $3,000 to the Garden City Visitors Bureau.
Second. Got a motion and a second. Is there further discussion? Hearing none, the clerk call the roll.
Councilmember Heller,
Yes.
Councilmember Jacobs,
Yes.
Councilmember Jorgensen,
Yes.
Councilmember Page.
Yes.
Thank you. Item F2, these are monthly staff reports, page 23 in your packet. We have three of our department, four of our department, five of our department. But keep counting there, Mayor, and you'll get it. Seeing no questions, we'll move on to item G1. This is a public hearing item, but for the staff briefing, ask Mr. Wadums if he would do that.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of the council. I have a brief staff report on this starting on page 32 with the proposed ordinance starting on page 33. What this is that, as you will recall, this is about 5G small cell wireless technology and facilities. We've talked about that in the past. Previously, the council has passed a template for a master license agreement with the industry, namely Verizon, T-Mobile, AT&T, Crown Castle, and some of the other ones. So that part's done, that piece is done. The council has also passed the design review standards, and so that piece is done. The last piece to get ready for 5G now, and let's see if, I don't know if anybody, it looks like perhaps there's somebody from the industry that is on Zoom, but the last piece is to make the code amendment for small cell wireless. And so just to recap, there is micro cell towers and macro cell towers. Our code currently covers macro cell towers, and the macro cell towers are the big ones, like, for example, at Veterans Memorial and Chinden at Ozzy's Car Care, I think. That's a big one. That's called a macro. Our code currently deals with macros, but our code currently does not deal with the micro. The micro is what the industry needs for 5G. And so if the council wants 5G in Garden City, and again, the city is preempted by the federal government. We can regulate design, but we cannot say they're not coming in. That's preempted by the federal government. So they're coming. We just need to get our code ready for them coming. So this is tonight's the first reading. I'm going to recommend that you do the first reading tonight, and we do not suspend the rules. So we have our full 3 readings on these things. When we come back in 2 weeks for the second reading, in your packet, there will also be a staff report from Development Services, and there will also be the proposed findings of fact, conclusions of law, and decision. I didn't think we needed those for the first reading, but those will be coming up for the second and third reading if the council wants to go that direction. So tonight is just the first reading of this ordinance. It is ordinance 10-1006-19. You might ask, why is it a 2019 ordinance number? Well, that's because we've been kicking this around since 2019. We did delay for a while. There was some litigation between, in the Ninth Circuit regarding the FCC. Ninth Circuit came back and the FCC said the FCC does have the authority to do these things, does have the authority to preempt the locals. And so we're stuck with that law. We're stuck with the preemption issue, and we just got to get ready for 5G. So with that, I stand for any questions, and I make a recommendation for a first reading tonight. Thank you.
Okay, questions of Mr. Wadums? Okay. Okay. This is a public hearing, so before we move to motion to read it, do we have anyone? No one is here to testify.
Maybe one tomorrow.
Is there anyone online that would like to testify? So since we've got our technology working tonight, raise your hand in the Zoom app and we'll recognize you. Yes, Melinda, go ahead. Merrill. It's. Whoop.
Oh, no, I'm sorry. I'm Melinda Merrill, and I'm with Egear and Merrill Public Policy, and we represent Crown Castle, but I didn't have any testimony tonight. I'm just listening in and can try and help answer questions or get answers if we need to.
All right, thank you very much. Okay, don't see anybody else, Lisa?
No, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, to entertain an action. We'll close it, actually. I need to close the public hearing. I'll entertain an action on CPA FY 2022-0010.
Mr. Mayor,
Yes,
I move that we ask the clerk to read ordinance CPA FY 2022-0010 by title only for the first reading.
I have a second.
Second.
And a motion and a second. Any discussion? Hearing none, with the clerk call the roll.
Councilmember Jacobs,
Yes.
Councilmember Jorgensen,
Yes.
Councilmember Page,
Yes.
Councilmember Heller.
Yes.
First reading ordinance 1006-19, an ordinance of the city of Garden City, a municipal corporation of the state of Idaho, amending Garden City Code Title 8 Development Code, Chapter 2 Base Zoning District Regulations, Article B Base Zoning District Provisions, Section 2 Allowed Uses, Article C Land Use Provisions, amending or adding Section 49 Small Cell Facilities, Chapter 6 Administration, Article A General Provisions, Section 2 Duties and Authorities, Section 4 Required Application Information, and Chapter 7 References, Article A Definitions, Section 1 Definitions of Uses by amending the language to include provisions for small cells, providing severability, repealing conflicting city code provisions, approving a summary of the ordinance, and providing an effective date.
Thank you. Item G2, this is the third reading of ordinance 1026-22. Again, Mr. Wadums, would you do a briefing?
Yes, Mr. Mayor, members of the council, my staff report on this agenda item starts on page, well, not my staff report. The staff report starts on page 82. My report is actually on page 39 with the proposed ordinance being in your packet, beginning on page 93. So I'm going to try to share my screen here. Perhaps. Mouse is squirrely, isn't it? Okay, so first thing I want to say is we've supplemented the council packet, and I want to briefly explain that. The supplement to the council packet is no big thing. The actual ordinance that's in your packet starts on page 93. And so the supplement, the new version of the ordinance that was supplemented in the packet and is also in front of mayor and council. Let me just briefly explain that. I took out wording that didn't need to be there. Is what the difference is. So the ordinance that you have on page, starting on page 93 of your packet, had some redundant and some wording that did not need to be there. So the one that's in front of you, it's essentially the same thing. I just took out unnecessary wording. What I did is I took a 41-page ordinance and I cut it down to a 30-page ordinance. There's no substantive changes. It's just I try to streamline that. But that being said, there are some things in here that I think are policy considerations that I just want to take a minute. And because this is for the third reading, I just wanted to take a minute and make sure the council and the mayor were aware of some things that are in this ordinance, this 1026-22. And so the first thing I have on the screen right now, that comes from page 104 of your packet. And I just want to make sure the council is comfortable with this, because what staff has done has changed this to say, look, and let me just back up. What this ordinance does is it replaces the design review committee with design review consultants. And we've talked about that before, and we vetted that pretty well. Included in that, though, is some other changes other than that. So this ordinance goes through the entire code, and whenever it says design review committee, it simply replaces the word consultants with committee. And the next thing on the agenda is to look at the agreement for the consultants. So this is just simply to get rid of the design review committee. They did a great job, but we're trying to improve the process, streamline the process, avoid unnecessary public hearings, so on and so forth. So the solution from staff, and I agree with it, is to go from a committee to a consultant. And so everybody understands that the consultant is just going to be a recommending body. So they're not making final decisions, and there's only going to be one person looking at it at a time. So it's not a body. What does that mean? You don't have to have open meetings for that. You don't need open meetings unless there's more than one person making a decision. Here we have one person making a recommendation. So open meeting laws will not apply. So it helps streamline the process, is what staff's thought on that is. Along those lines, then, one of the changes, and it's on 104 of your packet, is an amendment to 86A2. And what this says is What's going to happen is the design consultant makes a recommendation to the planning official. That's Ms. Thornborough. Ms. Thornborough is going to make a final decision on design review. But if council wants to look at that for whatever reason, and actually there's a standard and it's up on the screen, if council thinks that there may be significant adverse impact to the city as a result of the final decision, then the council can review it. It's similar to an appeal. So the council, I mean, if there's a big macro cell tower coming up somewhere and it's approved by design review and the city council says, well, hold on a minute, that might be a significant adverse impact to the city, then the council can review that. So the question is does the council want that review authority of Ms. Thornborough's final decisions? And so that's something I thought was a policy question. So I don't know if maybe you want to wait for deliberations on that, but I just wanted to make a record to make sure the council was comfortable with that. Another change that's kind of, I mean, within the main change then is what,
Mr. Wadums,
yes, Mr. Mayor.
so we don't get lost in these. Can
Yes.
we stop there and
Yes, of
and
course.
let the council
Love it.
respond to that
Yes, sir. Love it.
change? Anyone have a problem with that? And again, we're talking about the council's ability to review a recommendation that's been basically codified by the Development Services Director. If the council wants to take another look at that.
I have a question, Mr. Mayor.
Certainly.
When you say codified, I thought only the council had authority to codify. Or is that, am I mistaken?
Well, let's make sure I understand what you mean by codify.
I should have used the word approve.
Approve.
Oh, I think, okay.
Okay,
I-
yeah, poor choice of words.
Right, so the council to Councilmember Heller and Mayor Councilmember Heller, the council can delegate that. I mean, under LUPA, it's the council that's supposed to be making final approvals. The council can delegate it to planning and zoning commission, or the council can delegate it to design review. And in our case, years past, I think maybe 97, the council delegated design review to the design review.
Okay, I was confusing, I guess, that explanation with what I've been reading in earlier documents. Mostly critical of decisions not having been made by the council, but rather by commissions or committees. But that's not a general,
It's not a
it's
prohibition.
not applicable.
Mayor, Councilmember Heller, that's right. It's not applicable here.
Got
I think the law is pretty clear that the council can delegate that.
All right.
What the council cannot delegate it to is outside entities. So I mean, if this code amendment goes through, you're delegating to the planning official to design.
Got
it. You couldn't delegate it to like health and welfare.
I didn't think so. Thankfully. Yeah.
The other thing on this slide right here, Mayor, before I be quiet for a minute, is we're also changing the qualifications and conflicts of interest with planning and zoning. It just says that the commissioners are appointed and governed by the policies of LUPA. We're just going to follow LUPA. We're not going to create our own rules and regulations. So that the B right there is just saying whatever LUPA requires of planning and zoning, that's what Garden City's going to require. With that, I stand for questions on this first slide here.
Mr. Mayor, I have a question.
Sure.
So, Charlie, just to clarify, make sure I understand. So what you're proposing is that development services can make decisions. And so is it saying we do have the authority to review those?
Yes.
Or we do, okay.
Yes, and if I could give some context, Mayor, Councilmember Jacobs, some time ago, there was some issues that came up with the conditional, the cut process, the conditional use permits. And so what happened with those is those were being approved without the council seeing them. And so the council at the time, as it was established at that time, they wanted the review opportunity on cups. And so I did my legal review, I did my due diligence, and come to find out in Idaho, you can do that. And there was case law on that said, and we don't call it an appeal. Council can't appeal itself, but the council can decide to review things. And so we did that for cups, and staff thought that perhaps council wanted to do that for design review as well.
So we're delegating that to Janice Department, and then we have the opportunity to
review those decisions. And what's the process to get, for the council to get visibility, given the sheer number of things that she'll probably make decisions on? How do we get visibility to what is out there so that we know whether we want to look at it?
Well, that's a great question. So thank you, Mayor and Councilmember Jacobs. The way we do it with cups right now is that when a final decision is made on a cup, they go on the city council's consent agenda.
Okay,
And then so you could pull it off the consent agenda if you want. Otherwise, it's just treated as a final decision.
gotcha. Thank you.
And so we're thinking it might be a similar process for that unless Thornborough has additional ideas. And I think she might, because we've been kicking this around for quite a while.
Mayor, Councilmember Jacobs, council members, Mr. Wadums is exactly correct. The way that we do it now with conditional use permits is the meeting subsequent, the approval, the agenda item is placed on the consent agenda. I do have to admit, it can be slightly frantic, just the timing of when the packets go out. They should be going out prior to the meeting often. And so to make sure that we have that done in time. The other thought that I have would be more burdensome on the council, but we do have agency notices. And I believe that you should be receiving the agency notices. So you could flag ones of particular interest ahead of time. However, that would be difficult for you because you wouldn't know if it's approved or not. And so there's no glaringly great way of doing it. I would suspect that we would just put it on the consent agenda, similar to the conditional use process.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Mayor, I have a question. Ms. Thornborough, would that require a motion to open something for discussion to review a decision your group has made? That would require a formal motion by the council, wouldn't it?
Mayor, Councilmember Heller, that is exactly correct. Should the council wish to review, there would be a motion to review and remove it from the consent agenda.
Otherwise, a discussion is inappropriate. Is that right?
Mayor, Councilmember Heller, I would suspect that our city attorney would say that it would be, depending on the nature of the discussion too.
Yeah.
It may just be a question for clarification, but an actual discussion.
Oh, I see.
Um,
Thank you. I just wanted to make sure that was understood. Thank you.
And Mr. Mayor, if I could follow up to Councilmember Heller's question, the way we do it with cups is that they're on the consent, because I've seen it, it's happened. They're on the consent agenda. A particular council member has a concern, and so the council member says, I want to take it off. I'm making a motion to take it off the consent agenda, goes off the consent agenda to the regular agenda, and then that council member says, without getting into any details, but there has to be a standard legally. So the council member says, you know what, I think that this project may be an adverse impact to the city, and I want us to take a second look at it. And then at that point in time, it kicks it back into the public process. It's noticed up. What this does say is it's not de novo, meaning it's treated as an appeal. You don't have to have new testimony and everything. You just take a look at it like an appeal, and then it's set for a future and it's properly noticed so the public is aware of it. And that's how we do it with cups. And I think that's what the recommendation is, what we do with design review as well. The other side of it, maybe the council is going to trust development services on the design review and you do not want to have the review opportunity. That's within your discretion.
All right. Thank you for that clarification and your patience.
Great. So before we go on, I just want to get a feel. Are you good treating design review decisions like we do conditional use permit decisions? Meaning they'll go on the consent agenda. And unless they're pulled off, that will finalize the decision. Or
Mr. Mayor,
not, yes.
if I may, I'm in support of this change. I do want to say where in this review by council in situations where there may be a significant adverse impact to the city, I think that would be the exception to a much bigger rule. I don't foresee this being a routine process that's exercised. Maybe so. I can think of a couple times in my history with the city where things were reviewed by council and it was appropriate every time, but it didn't happen a lot. And so I think that this is a good language to have. It gives us an avenue to address those areas that, where we're concerned about adverse impact. But I think this consent agenda process is the correct way to pull it off. I'm in support of the change.
I appreciate your comments. If there's something there's a high likelihood that Ms. Thornborough would bring that to our attention if we had something that looked like it was going to be controversial or something else. So she'd have the ability to punt, so to speak, a decision to the council. So again, I think it's fine to have it in here. I think it would be rarely exercised likely. So there's I am sensitive to always sensitive to applicants and design review decisions, getting them coalesced in a form to be on the consent agenda and in a timely fashion can end up meaning certain applicants aren't going to make the cut, and there could be a delay of a couple of weeks to a next meeting. Is that accurate, Stoneborough? Just want to make sure we all understand what we're doing here.
Mayor and members of the council, in thinking through this proposed process, there may be a little bit more leniency than the conditional use process because it is becoming a consultation and a decision with staff. If staff knows that they may be missing the cut, that maybe that consultation could be bumped up. And so we're not strictly adherent to the day of the week of the meeting that we are on regularly scheduled hearings at this point in time. So perhaps there is a little bit of leniency, but certainly if an application has their consultation, say the Tuesday after the city council meeting, or even the Wednesday before, getting it to the next consent agenda may take an additional 2 weeks.
Okay.
Mr. Mayor,
Yes.
before we move on, I just would like a little bit of clarification on the language.
Okay, let's reference exactly where you are.
Okay, I am actually on the supplement provided in page 9.
Okay.
Duties and authority, paragraph A, the underlined within, and I think it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 lines down. Council determines in a public meeting, comma, within 15 days of commission action. What commission?
Okay, that's a typo. Thank you. Final, within 15 days of final decision. Thank you, Councilmember Jorgensen. That is a typo. That's what the cup, that's how the cup reads, but the commission's not going to be involved in that. So we change that to final decision. Good catch, Councilmember Jorgensen. Thank you.
Okay. Are we good to move on? We got more on this.
We will have an opportunity to chime in on, okay.
Yes, yes, I just, okay, I wanted to deal with the authority and the consent agenda issue, so we didn't have to come back and look all these pages up again.
Another way to maybe look at it there may be significant adverse impact. Some people will tell you that small projects should just go through staff, through the administrative process, but large scale projects maybe need to go to council. So if you trust development services to do small projects, but you want to take a second look on big projects, that's another way to look at it. I would think huge projects may have a significant adverse impact to the city, and the council may want to take a look at those big projects. That's just another way to look at it.
Yeah, I think, again, think projects that are significant, the development services director is going to take a hard look at those, and if they're virtually routine, like a residential detached subdivision, That might be a large project that stays on the consent. It's an 18-story tower. It might come back.
I would trust Ms. Thornborough to know when, you know, which ones that she would want
Yeah.
counsel on.
Okay,
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Moving on then. So the next slide I wanted to talk about here, right here. And just for those of everybody that's following along, that is going to be on page 107 of your packet. It's also on the supplemental because supplemental just took out the unnecessary stuff. But is the mayor and council comfortable with this? This, you know, again, this is another example of we're replacing design review committee with design review consultants. And it's basically, I mean, it speaks for itself. The one thing I wanted to make sure the council was aware is that you're delegating to your planning official who the consultants are going to be. So that's going to be a Ms. Thornborough decision. And so that's what D2 says. Design review consultants that shall be selected by the planning official as being experts in design review and is set forth in policy that the council is acceptable to the council via resolution. And then pursuant to the discretion of the planning official, the type and number of design review consultants and the type of review shall be determined. But yeah, what that says is you're delegating some of your authority to the planning official, Ms. Thornborough, and I wanted to make sure the council was comfortable with that.
So, Ms. Mayor, I have a question.
yes,
So the way you're stating that then is that council has no decision in the vetting of potential consultants.
Mayor, Council Member Jacobs, potentially. So if you pass this, then in the near future, we're going to come back at you with a resolution with what Ms. Thornborough thinks her criteria should be. And if you agree with Ms. Thornborough, then you sign the resolution and you're passing the torch off to her, so to speak, for her to make those decisions, whether it should be contracts with, for example, Derek Hurd or Brett LeBrie or some other architects. But it does say in here, these need to be experts in design review. We don't get a, you know, we're looking for architects and people with specialized knowledge in design. And so that would be delegating that to Ms. Thornborough.
Right, I think the only thing, and this is just more of a general statement, it's not anything that I would trust to happen for, is if there was a potential inappropriate relationship with a potential consultant that city council may be aware of, or, you know, conflict of interest or that type of thing, is how does that get vetted?
Well, oh, so that's all, Mayor and Council Member Jacobs, that's a little bit to be determined. That's also a little bit in the agreement. That's the next agenda item.
Okay.
And I can tell you that agreement was, because I think it's probably public record that the city is looking for the initial consultants. If we can come up with a meeting of the minds with them to be Derek Hurd and Brett LeBrie. And they both looked at the agreement and they both had questions about conflict of interest and what exactly is a conflict of interest, so on and so forth. And I think some of those issues are addressed in the agreement that's on the agenda.
I'm jumping ahead a little bit. All right,
Yeah, that's fine. I think we're gonna get there in a minute. So great question. So if it please the mayor and council, the next thing I wanted to make sure you were aware of is this new process that staff is recommending. And that is on page 114 of your packet for those of us reading along. And so just to get everybody up to speed, then there's really two different processes for design review. There's administrative process with notice, and then there's administrative process without notice. And so to deal with the change going from committee to consultant, these are the changes that staff is recommending. I will show you what's in red right here. That's the correct citation in the supplement that you have in front of you is the incorrect citation. So if the council's, if the council's wanting to make this law, I would say, move for a third reading as amended, including this proper code section right here. But that's a technicality. That's not a problem. But I just want to make sure the council is comfortable with this process right here. And maybe Ms. Thornborough could talk about this process a little more. Ms. Thornborough's process.
Mayor and council, this process is slightly different than the other two processes that are set up. The one process is a strict staff approval. Items that are processed under just a staff level approval without consultants, without the appeal and the ability for those to appeal or public hearing might be single family detached structures, sign permits, or manufactured home placements within parks. Those are all example of items that don't have a public hearing process set up within those approvals. They're strictly delegated to staff. And then on the other side, there's the public hearing process. And those are at this point in time, either going to Planning and Zoning Commission as a recommendation or a final approval in instances of variances and conditional use permits. This application type where it's being amended somewhat would be noticing individuals that if they wish to have standing the ability to appeal, then they would need to provide written notice to be incorporated into the staff report and also be reviewed by the consultants. And that would give them the ability to appeal should they disagree with the decision that's rendered. So this is the slightly different hybrid between the two. Mayor, Councilmember Page, it appears that you have a question.
Well, I want to make sure I understand this. And thank you. It's my understanding that to create standing, it's going to require more than just providing the notice, right? There also is this, requirement for proximity. Someone from Florida can't create standing by providing notice.
Mayor, Councilmember Page, I think that Mr. Wadhams has the next point that you'll see as he scrolls up, but there's a highlight to discuss that. If I believe that he's wanting to verify that council is comfortable right now as it is drafted. It does state that anyone who provides comment to the city would have that ability to appeal. And I think that he's hoping to vet that with you a little bit tonight.
Council President, Mayor, council members, to that point, that's exactly why this is highlighted, because the way that staff has drafted this is that anybody that wants to provide a written comment would have standing to appeal. That's not the legal threshold for standing. And so that's what I wanted to talk about. When it says standing right here, this is a broader definition that is legally required. And so does the council want a broader definition that's legally required and a definition that's not? I would suggest we should probably either change this word to stand from standing to something else, or we just make the definition match Idaho code. But right here, this says, yeah, if somebody wants to write in from California to talk about parking regs, then they now have standing to appeal. And I don't know if that's what the council is saying this time.
Okay, you open that up. That's not what the mayor wants, I'll tell you that. I think, just my opinion, defaulting to the state definitions is a safe way to look at this. That's a tested definition that doesn't preclude well, as far as appeals go, it doesn't necessarily limit anyone's ability to hear the discretion of whoever's running the meeting, either the mayor or the planning and zoning chairman. But when we get to the standing question, I like the state code as our standard. And then by saying state code, if that amends at some point in time, we don't have to change our code. Yeah.
Mr. Mayor,
Yes.
I agree, but my question was going to be the person who is running a hearing can recognize somebody who may not have standing and register those comments or handle those comments, however that person running the meeting sees fit. So it doesn't in any way prevent people from expressing themselves at a meeting. Is that right? It just doesn't give them the right to be
To appeal.
yeah, exactly.
Mayor, Councilmember Heller, that I think that's a policy decision for the council. I mean, I hate to just keep kicking the can, but I mean, these are the questions that I wanted to talk about because so let me just back up. I'm going to paraphrase what I think the legal definition of standing is. I think the legal definition of standing, give or take, is that you are within a 300-foot radius and you may be prejudiced by the approval or the denial of the application. I think that's what the legal definition of standing is, give or take. And that's different than what this definition is.
Yeah,
Um,
Mr. Mayor, if I may, Council President Page. So Charles, no, I didn't mean to suggest anyone would have to be recognized. I'm just saying that discretion would be in the hands of the person conducting the meeting. Is that correct? Is that right?
We could write this that, well, so that's kind of the Mayor and Councilmember Heller, that's a great question because that's kind of the rub because there isn't going to be a public process.
Yeah.
And so the question is what letters should staff be accepting? Should they be accepting people that meet the legal definition of standing or anybody that wants to write in? It's like somebody from Florida or something.
Well, my personal preference would be for those people who have standing, but in a public forum. And I don't mean to suggest anyone should be invited to speak or recognized to speak, but I think I would prefer to let the person conducting that meeting have the discretion to allow that doesn't give the person standing to allow them to speak. It's my understanding anyway.
So if I understand Mayor, Councilmember Heller, just because they're allowed to speak or they're allowed to submit written testimony,
Yeah.
that does not necessarily mean they have a right to appeal.
Correct.
Okay, we can change,
I mean, that's what I'm thinking.
if that's the will of the council, we can work with that.
Or if that clutters this, or adds a dimension of ambiguity, I'd withdraw that suggestion.
Well, and I'll, we're not in deliberations right now, so I can give you my 2 cents on that. The question is whether you want somebody you want to give somebody the ability to testify about everything.
Mhm.
Regardless of whether it impacts them or not.
Uh,
Maybe the council does. Maybe they have another question.
No,
I think there's a distinction, just to give you my perspective. I think the latitude would be if it happened to be a legislative matter where we want to gather information. I don't know. We may want to hear from somebody from Florida that went to school there and has a master's degree. I don't know if we could find somebody like that. I'm referencing Ms. Thornborough. But on our quasi judicial operations, I think the limitation to standing makes sense. You know,
Mr. Mayor, that definition of standing that Charlie gave, is that the state that you're talking about? Okay,
yes,
that makes sense.
yes. And that doesn't mean people won't send you something via email, or you may get some contact, but I think the instruction from me would be that your decision's based on the information that is properly before you. And that context would be that complies with the standing rule.
Mayor and council, if you think that through too, so if you say that anybody that writes a letter has standing, then you're saying anybody that writes a letter can then appeal to the council. And then could potentially sue us in court. So do you really want to open that?
Mr. Mayor, I wasn't suggesting that at all. I was
Sure.
just suggesting that a person conducting a meeting might recognize someone to speak who doesn't have standing without effect on those decisions that are driven by comments provided by those who have standing. But if that clutters or introduces more ambiguity than is necessary, then I'll withdraw the suggestion.
And Mayor and members of the council, if I may, I just to point out, in my tenure, there's certainly been individuals who have definitely met the prejudice component, but have been outside of 300 feet. That 300 feet can be exhausted quickly, depending on the nature of the development. For example, if there's something across the river that may be creating a situation for somebody that 300 feet might be eaten up very quickly. There's another, a conditional use permit that was approved. There were a number of people that were quite interested in that application, and I think the majority of which were all at least 600 feet from the application itself. So just to provide a little bit of context on that.
So there's some latitude there. If you're being impacted, you can demonstrate that.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. Moving on to the next.
Mr.
Okay, Councilmember Jorgensen.
I apologize.
No, no. Go ahead.
Mr. Roddams,
Yes, ma'am.
just for my education and clarification, I want to make sure I'm tracking this correctly. In the supplement and also in the packet, I just want to verify strike throughs was existing language, underlined language is inserted new language.
Mayor, Councilmember Jorgensen, that's exactly right. And that's a good question for people that aren't into the code amendment business like I am. Underline are the adds and the strike throughs are the get rid of.
Okay. And one more time, one other question, just because my little brain, if you could maybe help me understand a little bit. In the draft in the council packet, the administrative process with notice was under section 16 and now it's section 20. Can you, and I know it's a lot to ask, but is it just a matter of restructuring it based on the increased efficiency, or was there substantial
Great question.
information removed or inserted?
Six. So Mayor, Councilmember Jorgensen, I have amendments to 8685 as being section 20. Is that right?
In the supplement that was provided, yes, correct. In the packet, it was section.
Oh, I know why okay, I know why the numbering is wrong. Mayor, Councilmember Jorgensen, the numbering is slightly off because the design review findings of fact that are in the next code amendment. Staff initially put those changes in both ordinances, and I said, we don't need those in both ordinances. We need to, so let's take it out of the consultant ordinance and leave it with the Cyril Mitchell. So that's why the numbering got slightly modified.
Thank you.
Again, Councilmember Jorgensen, great catch.
Okay, so just so we're clear before we move on, administrative process with notice, item D is anyone withstanding as defined by state code and has provided written comment as standing. I just want to get the language, Charlie.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that.
Before we move on, so something to that effect. So
Staff-
that
staff
allows,
thinks-
that's the 300 feet, and someone that has a prejudice, it's definitely impacted, even if it's beyond 300 feet. As defined by state code. So are we comfortable with Charlie dealing with that language?
Yes.
Okay, all right,
Yes.
very good, all right.
And Mayor and Council, just to follow up on Councilmember Jorgensen's questions, on the supplement, there were a couple additions to it. I added a line saying that we are specifically repealing, and if you want to look at it, Councilmember Jorgensen, Mayor, the rest of the council, on the supplement on page 2 of the supplement, I added a couple section numbers, which is going to throw your numbering off too. I added, for example, I added section 2. Which says this ordinance 685 that was adopted on March 3rd of 1997. That's what created design review committee, that portion of that ordinance is being repealed. And so I just added a couple things to clarify that this is a partial repeal and we're repealing the committee and replacing it with the consultant. So
Mr. Roddams, I apologize.
Oh, go.
1987.
The year is missing the supplement draft.
Yeah. So.
That might be needed just to make it clear.
Okay. All right, well, yep, so if you look at the 1997 is missing right there. It is referenced up before the first whereas. It says 3rd day of March 1997. This is at 97 didn't make it down there. Again, nice catch, Councilmember Jorgensen.
Yeah.
Okay, hopefully that explanation was sufficient. Next thing I wanted to just show that, again, this is what we were talking about. The next thing that I wanted to make sure the council had the buy-in on was what's on page 115 of your packet. And that's the process for administrative process without notice. And the one thing I wanted to just talk about briefly is this word unclear. It says if it's unclear whether they if it's unclear about the application, then staff can send it over to the Planning and Zoning Commission or whatever. But my question was, what does unclear mean? I wanted to make sure that the council was comfortable with the word unclear, and the question is unclear to who? I suppose it should be unclear to planning official. Okay. But is the council okay with that wording?
Mr. Mayor,
Yes.
Mr. Wadums, I'm not.
Okay, Councilmember Jorgensen, that's why I'm here, to make everybody happy.
Mr. Mayor, Mr. Wadums, I do believe that there needs to be an attempt at some definition there so that there is guidance. And again, the way I look at ordinance and contracts is in the event that this hopefully outlasts many members of the council and potentially some of the staff here, it needs to be clear so that we're not dependent on tribal knowledge or assumptions. So I would prefer that we define this with some specificity, if at all possible.
So Mayor, Councilmember Jorgensen, what I'm hearing is you want it to be clear what unclear. Okay. That's why I highlighted it, because I had the same thought, but it's unclear.
Do you have an idea of that, Charlie?
That's again, Ms. Thornborough's wording. I defer to her.
Well, Mayor, Council, members of the council, since there are a number of you on this. I don't know that it's exactly my wording per se, but I think the intent is when it is unclear for if it should be a staff level decision. For example, perhaps somebody applied under, so this is everything. This is not just the design review consultant process that this would apply to. So say somebody said that they think it's use X, that would be a permitted use, it would be a staff level review. And then the planning official might go, I don't know if I think it's that use. I think maybe this needs to be reviewed as another use and therefore submitted up to the Planning and Zoning Commission. Might be an example of where that would be unclear. And so the administrative application is the application process that is just a straight staff level approval. So that's giving the staff the ability, the intent of that provision is to give the staff the ability to push it on, to give it to a quasi judicial review board.
So is it more a decision when it's in conflict with two different departments? Would that be a better definition?
An example might be staff is not sure if the landscaping criteria, that really subjective criteria, is being met, or whether or not the provisions of the code that they're reviewing are clearly being met is
You
where.
mean unclear.
Yes.
Or uncertain.
Okay, so are we talking about if there's a disparity that exists between the applicable purpose and any standard that's being adhered to?
Mayor, I think it would be more, yes, the applicable standard, whether or not it's clearly being adhered to.
So instead unclear, there likely be some disparity that is apparent.
And Mayor, that would be correct. Where it would probably be staff going, I don't know if it's
Sure,
meeting the
sure.
standard.
Yeah, so
Mr. Mayor, would proper language then be, when staff is, unclear if ascertainable standards have been met?
Perhaps.
I mean, because then we're pointing back to standards and whether the standards have been satisfied.
I think to get to Councilmember Jorgensen, and staff questions whether applicable standards may have been met. There's a question. Is there a question?
And Mayor, members of the council, yes, this is intended when there's a question of whether or not the standards or the purpose is being met. It does say the applicable purpose or any standard is being adhered to.
Okay. Councilmember Jorgensen, do you like the word when there's a question? Whether
Mr. Mayor.
there's a standard or met means somebody, go ahead. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Sorry, I was going to ask President of
Sure.
Council to restate it because I think I captured it correctly, but I'm not sure. When ascertainable standard,
When staff is uncertain if ascertainable standards have been met, satisfied, pick your word. And that could go for purpose too, ascertainable purposes. But then we're pointing to a document, right? A
Right.
comprehensive plan,
Something.
Mayor, members of the council, I believe that this would be subject to the code standards, so not a plan itself.
In my experience, council might suggest ascertainable would be good, so would the word applicable. Maybe applicable standards or ascertainable standards.
Mr. Mayor, I like either of those.
Okay, you've got a choice, Mr. Wadhams.
Thank you.
Okay,
Okay, and here's the big one, 86B3. This is the process, and Ms. Thornborough is going to speak to this. This is the new process. This is really the nuts and bolts of it. And I just want to make sure the council understands the nuts and bolts of the process. I defer to Ms. Thornborough.
Mayor and members of the council, while it is a new process, the intent is that really the same items that are being reviewed by the current design review committee would still require a consultant's review to be incorporated into the staff report. And so
So for those of us that are reading along, it's page 122 and 125.
what about in the new
23.
23? Thank you.
yes.
And so it's really just spelling out what current practice already is when the items would be reviewed, different development would be reviewed by the consultants. And then it also it spells out the process to allow for the meeting between the applicant, the staff, and the consultants. The ability for those to provide written comments ahead of time. And then we've already gone elsewhere in code and discussed the ability for the city council to review this, as well as those that provide those who have standing who provide written comment could appeal.
Okay, any comments on that one? Okay. What's next?
Okay, with that, Mayor, Council, those are the main changes. I just wanted to make sure the council is aware of and is comfortable with. It sounds like we have a little wordsmithing to do. I think I took good notes on the wordsmithing. Other than that, it's just like what we've talked about. We're going to replace the design review committee with a design review consultant. We're going to cut down on the need of public hearings, and we're going to try to streamline the process. So with that, I would stand again for any further questions.
Any final questions?
That's Mr. Mayor.
Yes.
I just want to verify, I was hoping it would jump out, but it's not. For me anyway. In section 8-6B-3 that Mr. Thornborough just briefed us on. Is there any substantial changes from what was provided in the packet versus what is in the supplement?
Mayor and Council, Member Jorgensen, no. There was no substantive changes. It was just taking out unnecessary wording.
Okay.
So it's the same. Good question.
Thank you.
Mr. Mayor,
Yes.
I have a couple questions just really about wording. And I'm gonna set the revised aside. And just because I've made notes and prepared with what was in the packet. And I don't want to point people to different pages. So referring to our packet on page 45. This is section 5B3 regarding waterways. In sub 5, there's, to me, this language is confusing. And I'd like to propose different language that I think says the same thing, but in a way that's maybe more clear. And that would be irrigation ditches, laterals, canals, and drains do not require fencing. If fencing is installed, only open fencing is allowed. Privacy fencing shall not be utilized unless required by the irrigation or drainage district. My concern about that, about this provision in general are a couple things. It seems that we're giving guidance, but then delegating the approval of the matter anyway to a different district. So I'm uncomfortable. That's kind of like telling your kid, that asks a question. Well, I don't know, what did mom say? And mom says, well, I don't know, what did dad say? If the irrigation district approves this fencing, I prefer either just to remain silent on it or to say that there will be. It's left to be ambiguous in my mind.
Okay, so just so I can, Mayor, Council President Page, you're talking about 84A9 waterways. I show that on page 96 of the packet, but my numbering could be off. And then what subsection is it, existing code that you want to take a look at?
How are we so far off? I'm on page 45.
Okay, you're in the wireless communications facility, Charlie. We're back to that. And then there's a section that
It's 84A49, 84A9.
is fences and walls, and then there's a waterways section.
Right, I'm with you. Yes.
So we're in the,
Because we are on 102622, right?
Yes. So I have the reference. We're on 102622. I have the reference to 84A9 waterways, and staff's happy to change any wording that the council wants to. What?
delegating, is dealing with irrigation districts. And not everything, there are irrigation districts, and then there are nonprofit irrigation associations. If anybody picked that up in one of the memos that Mr. Wadham sent out. So the fencing, just for an example, if we're looking at fencing for Fairview Acres isn't an irrigation district. It's a nonprofit irrigation. Is it association the right word, Mr. Wadham?
I believe so. We were just recently looking at that. I
Or
think it is
something
an
like that.
association, nonprofit.
So, and those Fairview Acres laterals are within a district, I'm not sure we want the district to be chiming in on some of these local issues. So my recommendation, and Ms. Thornborough, you can chime in on this certainly, but that we send applications out for comment to the, whether it's a district or whether it's a irrigation association. And then we'll make a decision based on the comments, but I think it's a mistake for us to bind ourselves. Irrigation associations, for example, many of whom don't have paid professional staff. They have volunteer or board members that operate on a stipend. They're not in the business of formalizing an approval mechanism, at least not that I'm aware of. The district's going to be more sophisticated, cover a large area, have all kinds of policies and protocols and legal representation and all that stuff. So I think my recommendation would be that certainly these go out to comment to any district or association that would be that it would impact. And I think Ms. Thornborough does that now. And then based on those comments, they can be part of the packet, and the decision can incorporate or not incorporate the comments. Sometimes we don't get comments back. There's a timing issue there as well. So I think Council President Page, that was a great catch. I think that's one we ought to fix.
Mayor, President Page, a couple of just thoughts on that. So that's existing wording. I wasn't tasked with looking at that wording, which is fine. This hasn't really been noticed up to change that wording either, so we might have a notice issue.
Okay.
So I would recommend that if the council wants to take a look at that wording, that we notice it up and we come back on it.
Okay. Any objection?
Not at all. I have a couple other areas that
Yes, please.
perhaps weren't noticed up also.
We can notice them up for next time.
This section, members of the council, is on the original packet on page 89. This is section H, step 2, sub 1E. And this is in regard to neighborhood meeting notice. And this is a little bit of a pet peeve of mine. I'd like to see this change in code. The current language says proof of posting. The applicant shall submit a notarized statement and a photograph of the posting in the city's application. Notice removal. The notices shall be removed no later than 3 days after the neighborhood meeting for which the notice has been posted is ending. So here we're talking about these big signs that we all see. And it's irritating to me to drive through our city and see a notice for a meeting that was 3 years ago. And it looks a little bit junky and such. And so I would propose language that says this: notice signage. The notices shall be removed no later than 3 days after the neighborhood meeting for which the notices have been posted is ended. That's current language here. And then I would add this: on the next business day following the 3-day removal deadline, Garden City staff may, there's no must there, but may remove the notice, dispose of the notice material, and charge the applicant a removal fee.
Again, Mayor and Council, happy to look at that. I don't know if we're noticed up for that tonight, but if you want to get me your proposed wording, I can get it noticed up and we can get it back on the agenda. I can make that happen.
Are there other comments on that? I don't like those notices.
Okay.
Mr. Mayor, President of Council, I agree.
So why, Mr. Mayor?
Okay. Very good.
And finally, under required findings. To my colleagues here, page 73 of the original packet. This is section D.
Oh, so, sorry to interrupt, Mayor, Council President, that's been taken out of this ordinance because it was repetitive.
Okay,
Because we're gonna be talking about that on the next ordinance.
I'll save that. Yes, I apologize, I was not prepared, for this meeting with this new packet. And so I apologize to the public it feels like we're muddling through new material. It's not intentional.
No, just what we have to do sometimes, but I appreciate the comments. Is there anything else? Okay, so with the third reading, Mr. Wadums, do you have anything further?
Well, there's two issues, and you look at your agenda, there's really two issues here. There's the third reading of ordinance 1026-22. But there's also the companion decision document that's going to be required if the council would like this code amendment. And by my count, that starts on page 133 of your packet. And so there's actually, I think, two motions to make. One is for a third reading by title only after a deliberation process. And then also is to look at whether the council likes the findings of fact, conclusions of law, and decision that are proposed starting on page 133. You will see what staff does is staff comes up with two different alternatives. Here's some suggested wording if you want to approve it, and here's some suggested wording if you don't want to approve it. And so I think during your deliberations, that would be part of it as well. So.
A question, this would be kind of a point of order question. We've made changes. If we have the third reading and then go on to the next item of findings, are those going to merge?
Yes, I would think so. I think
Okay.
the motion would be for a third reading as amended pursuant to our discussion here tonight.
Oh, okay. Is there any reason to, instead of adopting and publishing, that we wait until we see it, or do we need to adopt?
Well, no, Mr. Mayor, and that's another thing that I wanted to mention, that if this whole thing, this supplement you got at the last minute, and again, the supplement is taking stuff out, not putting things in, but there's no reason why this council couldn't continue this for a third reading in 2 weeks to a date certain. If that makes the council more comfortable, there's no problem at all. If the council wants to get rid of it, take care of this tonight, we can do that. If the council wants to come back and look at the changes first, we can do that as well.
I'm just bringing that up because we've covered a lot of new ground here.
Well, Mr. Mayor, if there's not a procedural problem with postponing this, I would like to spend more time with this document. I just really honestly don't think I've given it the due diligence that voters would expect of me.
Mr. Mayor,
Yes,
I also would like the opportunity to review in detail what I presume is the final draft. I would prefer to have an opportunity to comb through this supplement as it's presented. Simply because there is extensive changes as noted from what was provided in the packet.
sure, sure. You can get it, we can do that with a clean copy, so we're not trying to merge documents together. Yeah.
And that new, Mr. Mayor, that new document would be generated with the changes we've suggested this evening.
Yes, I've taken, Mayor, Councilmember Heller, I've taken good notes. I'll go back and listen to the audio to make sure I don't miss anything. And then I'll come back in 2 weeks with what I think is a clean final version based on all the comments here tonight.
Okay, with that, I'd entertain a motion to move the third reading of ordinance 1026-22 to a date certain of, what's the date, Lisa? Somebody with a September
12th.
September 12th, 2022.
Mr. Mayor, I so move.
Okay,
I'll second.
got a motion and a second. And the motion is to move this item, continue it to September 12th, 2022. there any discussion on the motion? All in favor, say aye. Any opposed? Motion carries. Okay, next item, item G3. This is resolution 1126-22, approving the design review consultant services agreement template. Mr. Wadums.
Mayor, members of the council, this is, we touched on this just a couple minutes ago, so you could pass this by resolution tonight, or you could kick it for 2 weeks to a date certain with the ordinance. But what this is the proposed template for the design, for an agreement with the design review consultants. We have talked to the two that we're anticipating we're going to use right away. We got the buy-in from Derek Hurd and Brett Labrie. They both are agreeable to this, I believe, in concept and maybe specifically as written. There is a fee schedule on page 2 of the agreement, which is on page 142 of your packet. My understanding is everybody's in agreement that that's a good, reasonable fee schedule. It says, this agreement says they're an independent contractor. They're not an employee of the city, so on and so forth. All the other boiler point you would, that's not the right word, the standard wording that you would expect in an agreement such as this. And so I think the council could pass this agreement by resolution. One thing I will point out is what's proposed is you are authorizing again Ms. Thornborough to sign these agreements for the city. So it's a little bit of a delegation to Ms. Thornborough. If you would like the mayor to sign these agreements, we could do that. Or if you trust Ms. Thornborough to sign these agreements, that's what's currently in front of you. That'll stand with us for any questions.
Any questions?
Boilerplate, that's the word I was trying to say. Boiler.
Go ahead.
Mr. Mayor.
Yes.
2 items. One, I am inclined to move this to date certain to coincide with the third reading and of the revised material or revised proposed draft of the ordinance 1026-22. But I also do have a question, and Mr. Wadums just kind of touched on that. Is there pros and cons of having the mayor sign versus Ms. Thornborough?
Efficiency is the pro. The con is, I don't really see a con because this agreement is, all agreements we do, virtually all of them go through Mr. Wadums. So this would be pretty much a fill in the blank. And because it's had legal review, Jen would bring it up to me and I'd sign it. I don't review them in that context. So it's an efficiency thing, and I think there's some value to that. We have a full-time city attorney and a part-time mayor, and a full-time development services director. So I'm comfortable with having Ms. Thornborough sign these. I'm really got an efficiency bent going. I think a lot of what I hope we do at the next meeting really will help some of the efficiency here. So we aren't in a position where we're having to add staff, frankly.
Mr. Mayor, I have a question for Mr. Wadum. Is there anything in this contract that is affected by the postponement of our?
No, Mayor, Councilmember Heller, no, you could continue this or not continue this. It will not change anything. Delaying the ordinance by 2 weeks will not impact any of this. Let me just say that the version that's in here right now does have the signatory being the mayor, but we've gone back and forth. It's really up to the council. We have one version that the signatory is Jenna, Ms. Thornborough. We have one signatory, one that the signatory is the mayor. I think I'm recommending that the signatory be Ms. Thornborough.
Yeah, that was going to be my second question, so thank you.
But yeah, you could pass this resolution today and it's not contingent on what you do in 2 weeks.
Okay.
So it's really up to the council.
Okay, any further questions? Okay, what's the pleasure of the council?
Mr. I move that we have it coincide with the rewrite of the code and just
Okay,
till date certain of
September 12th.
September 12th.
Okay,
Have both documents at the same time.
okay.
I would second.
Motion and a second. To continue resolution 1126-22 to a date certain of September 12th, 2022. Any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Next item, item G4. This is a third reading on ordinance 1024-22. Mr. Wadums, whenever you're ready.
Thank you. Okay, there's a PowerPoint that's also part of your supplement. And it's not any new information. It's just, I wanted to summarize a couple things to make sure that the council is aware. And so I had shared screen this PowerPoint. Let's see if I can run. You know how to do this, Lisa?
Is this one here?
So is that how we still share screen?
Yes.
Okay.
No, but I'm sorry. Didn't.
Share screen. So down there.
Yes.
Okay. Okay, I just wanted to recap because we've been talking about this for several months, and just like the other one, we've received recommendations from both the Design Review Committee and the Planning and Zoning Commission. Both of those bodies recommended that the Searle Mitchell be repaired, basically, and then the City Council decided to repeal it. So I just wanted to hit a couple of things on this ordinance, so we're all on the same page. Again, one of the issues that we need to be very careful with is that our standards need to be objective. If they're arbitrary or capricious or vague, we're going to have problems potentially in court. So that's what these code amendments are aimed at fixing. There was initially, we had three different things going on. We were talking about if we're going to keep the work live create or the live work create Searle Mitchell overlay district, then should there be a 1-to-1 ratio? And here tonight, it doesn't matter because the council has decided to repeal that. We also talked about parking requirements in the overlay district, and that's become irrelevant because the council has opted to repeal the overlay district. And again, you know, let me just go on record again. There's no intent that I've heard to get rid of the branding. It's just to get rid of the overlay district. So what we're here with on the third reading is to repeal that overlay district and to also try to make our design review findings in 86B3 objective and not subjective. So right here, that what this slide says basically is because we are repealing the overlay district, that at some point in time, probably sooner than later, we should look at the base parking regulations. And as the council knows, there is a parking study that has gone out, and staff is going to be looking at parking regulations, and it's going to be in front of council soon as we can possibly get it to you. But because we're repealing the overlay, we're going to have to take a look at the base parking regulations. Let's see here. So applicability, let me catch up here. I'll make sure the council is good with this. And for reference, that is on page 198 of your council packet, I do believe, and that's the ordinance, the code amendment. And staff, I just wanted to make sure the council saw it, make a record of this. Staff wanted to make it clear that design review applications, if they're illegal, or if they're not safe, they're not going to get it approved. So staff put that in the applicability section, and that's 8(1)(a)(4). And what that says is if it's illegal or if it's not safe as defined, and I'll talk about that in a minute, then it's not going to be an approval. So That's what that change is, the proposed change. This right here, this slide just shows you what the design review findings were. And if you recall, there was a judge that took issue with some of these findings in particular and said that they all need to be objective. And so that's what our task at hand is. This is a red line or, underline striking through of the old wording and the new proposed wording. That's really hard to read. So this slide right here shows you what a clean copy of the proposed wording would be. And this is the same version that is in the ordinance. I will say that these findings have morphed over time. And I don't think that this ordinance has to go back to design review and planning and zoning, because they are your recommending bodies, but they did not make a recommendation on this part. So they were asked to make a recommendation on these, and they have not made a recommendation on these. So I'm not concerned about that. We received no recommendation from their recommendation was to not repeal Searle Mitchell and maybe to get a committee and maybe to do some other things, but they did not specifically look at this wording. So this is morphed over time. I'm not going to drop any names because I did not ask for permission to drop any names, but I can tell you multiple eyes have looked at this, internal and external. We've had planners, both government and private. We've had land use attorneys. We've had a law school professor. And again, I'm not mentioning names because I did not tell them ahead of time I wanted to, but we've probably had 20 different professionals studying this right that's up on the screen. And the goal is to try to make it objective. What I will, if somebody asks me, can I promise you that we would win in court based on this wording? I would say, no, I cannot promise you that. What I can tell you is this wording is a lot more objective than the previous version. I think I would be comfortable defending this wording in court, but perhaps there are some other words that would be more objective. And so my point in saying this now is I want the council hopefully to be very comfortable that hopefully these are some objective standards, because that's the legal criteria that we have to work with. So I will just leave this up and say, hey, this is the nuts and bolts of this code amendment. I can tell you that I know that perhaps some of you have some different wording. I can also tell you that on finding number 4 right there, where it says the proposed design shall be compatible with the neighborhood and scale and intensity. Staff would like it to say in scale, intensity, and material. So, oh, you're changing that. It's okay.
To 6 material.
Okay, well, I guess staff wants to put that somewhere else, so I'll let staff comment on that. We've talked about it right before we came down here, and we were talking about material in 4. But Ms. Thornborough's here. I think Ms. Thornborough has some ideas on whether these are objective. And I will submit to that in a minute. I think that perhaps Mayor and Council has some ideas on maybe some terms that are more objective, and I will submit to that as well. The last 2 slides, though, before I defer to Ms. Thornborough and stand for questions, are what happens if somebody has an application and they can't make these findings? Right now, the code says you have to apply for a variance, and so I put on this PowerPoint what a variance looks like. And if somebody requests a variance from these standards, that would go to planning and zoning. That's the way the code currently reads. And so these findings would be between the applicant, the consultant, and the planning official, unless somebody asks for a variance, and then that tracks it up to planning and zoning. And then planning and zoning decides whether there's an undue hardship. I want to make sure the council is aware, for somebody to get a variance, the way it's currently written, it's very difficult to get a variance. You got to prove undue hardship, and you can see it on your screen. I bolded undue hardship is really the standard. So an alternative that I kind of touch on in my memo, and it's not necessarily for tonight, but it maybe is for in months to come, is maybe you want a different alternative. Maybe you want something called alternative compliance, like what the city of Boise has. Alternative compliance is an easier standard to meet than a variance, and it would be perhaps an option that the council would be willing to consider. So the way it is right now, if the council likes these findings or something similar to these findings, if an applicant cannot meet them, then they ask for a variance, and then it goes to planning and zoning, and then they have to talk about whether there's an undue hardship. And when you talk about undue hardship, for those of us that have studied variances a little bit, the law is the undue hardship cannot be caused or created by the applicant. It's got to be undue hardship that was not caused or created by the applicant. But there are those, including the city of Boise, that has a different alternative, and that's alternative compliance. And so I just raised that now because I think that issue will be coming up, if not now, in the near future. And so I think Ms. Thornborough has thoughts about these findings here.
And thank you, Mr. Wadums, Mayor and members of the council. I did want to point out that the city did receive, or the city received, staff at least at 5:20, an email from Miss Joanne Butler asking for some comments to be submitted for the record. And if you wouldn't mind, I'd like to go through those with you. Her first comment, I think, has been taken care of by some alterations that have.
Ms. Thornborough, pull that mic over there.
Her first comment, I believe, has been taken care of by amendments that are already incorporated, where she had noted under where it says D required findings, that she was concerned that the previously included phrasing design standards adopted by the city may seem to point towards standards that may not be adopted as of yet. And so she did suggest that to refine that to note specifically Title 8, Chapter 4. However, in looking at these, I believe that that's already been taken care of, whereas point bullet number 1 simply states the proposed design shall comply with all design standards in this title. Her additional 3 comments really have to do with number 8 that's up there. The first concern that she notes is that the term waterways is not defined in code. Just a really brief look at a code where the Garden City Code does utilize waterways elsewhere, for example, is 85A5E. Oh, please excuse me, it will be defined in code with this. So it would be streams and water courses within the jurisdiction of Garden City, including man-made waterways such as canals and irrigation ditches. So there will be a definition of waterways included with this ordinance, should it go through on the 3rd reading. The word preserve, she notes concern with the phrase preserve and enhance, as preserve implies preservation of the status quo and enhance means something beyond status quo. And she had suggested the proposed design shall be compatible with and enhance. So changing the word preserve to compatible with. And just because this is how this exercise has gone, I immediately looked up the definition of compatible, and compatible, a definition is exist or occur without conflict. And then, are they already all made?
Okay.
All right, Charlie is saying he made all of these changes. I am noting that we do have preserve here in here, just so you know.
So these are
Maybe I have-
changes that aren't reflected on our,
Maybe I have an old. And also, I do apologize if Mr. Wadums has made this. I did not get the final version, so I think I may have pulled this up until around 5 o'clock today. So we may have already all of those addressed in this, if there are no preserves in there at all. So he may have received this previously and made those changes. So with that, I will scrap the trying to go through her comments. And then one item that we had discussed, number 4, there had previously been a word character that had been thrown around, and understandably that is fairly subjective. And so trying to think through all of the what ifs, staff might suggest in number 6 that the proposed architecture and site improvements shall have facade features, include materials, as well as building form. and other physical improvements that are compatible or enhance the neighborhood. So adding the word materials and building form.
Mr. Mayor,
Yes,
Ms. Thornborough, materials and what was the other word added?
Building form.
Building form.
Mhm.
Can you tell me, are those defined terms?
Materials, I don't believe that either one of them likely are. I can look to see, building form would not be, I was trying to identify a word that was less stringent than architectural style. I didn't want to be so stringent where somebody would think everything in this neighborhood has to be craftsman, but something that would allow for how you would define character, architectural character. So no, building form is not, and I can look and see if materials are defined. That may be a code that or definition that we do have.
Okay.
Mr. Mayor,
were you through, Councilmember Fraser?
I am, but I do have another question, but I'll,
Go ahead.
sure.
I am interested, Ms. Thornborough, to know, and it's gone. From the PowerPoint presentation. Advancing one slide, please. Between undue hardship and the next slide. A standard of undue hardship and a standard of alternative compliance. As you know, as a department head, do you have a preference?
Mayor, members of the council, I really do like the alternative compliance concept, but I think that it would be better placed throughout 8.4, where you have strict standards in place. For example, one tree at every 50 lineal feet. But if you cannot do that to meet an alternative compliance, say there's power lines or something, that there are other standards that you could apply. And so my preference is to really look at all of the standards that are throughout that really thick section of all of the chapter 4 in Title 8 that are the standards for the design review in its entirety instead of just in the findings. My concern, if we add them now as findings without really thoroughly vetting it and thinking through this as thoroughly as we've done with the rest of the code, that we could open up some situations where you know, if the site involves space limitation or is unusually shaped, what are the standards that we do apply then? Is it anything or, you know, and so really thinking through some of how this would be applied. I think it's a great concept. I think it could be very useful for the city to have alternative compliance in addition to a variance standard. But I think it would be better placed perhaps throughout chapter 4.
Mr. Mayor,
Yes,
I have a few questions.
go ahead.
Ms. Thornborough, for the benefit of all, could you please provide some of Ms. Butler's credentials to help explain why you were citing her comments?
Certainly, Mayor, Councilmember Jorgensen, I don't know all of her credentials that may be on a resume, but Ms. Butler is a land use attorney that has been involved with the city. She's very highly involved with land use issues throughout the region and is highly respected within the community.
Thank you. Ms. Thornborough and Mr. Adams, for clarity, on item number 8, Ms. Butler, I may have misunderstood. I believe Ms. Butler's comments were to remove the word preserve.
So let me just say, I was not going to drop Joanne Butler's name. I think she's listening right now because I did not ask her ahead of time. I don't know if this email that Jenna's referencing was meant to be a public document or not. I can tell you, I got an email from her and I made all her changes last week. So I think all of her recommendations are what you're looking at tonight.
But on item 8, we do have the word preserve.
It was, the recommendation was to change that to compatible.
Yeah, and from a legal standpoint, if the council thinks compatible is more objective, I have no problems with doing that.
That,
Well, you may not be able to preserve something,
And that's my concern is.
Yeah.
There may be an impossibility to preserve.
and it's something that's compatible.
Just so the mayor and council know, I'm not married to any of these words. I mean, doing anything with the committee. There's a lot of hands in the cookie jar. I don't have any, I'm not gonna lose sleep if the council doesn't like any of these words. I'm not married to any of them. I welcome. The council thinks there's better words to substitute in. I welcome that. I will not take that personal this way.
so Mr. Adams, I would like to see that drafted with the recommendations of Ms. Butler. And the shall be compatible. I believe that's how I captured it.
Yeah,
And
that
and
works for
then,
me.
Mr. Wadums, I have another question for you. In item E. We're in that item, we're referring to the design consultant. But given the fact that we haven't voted to update our ordinance yet, would that be in conflict? Do we need to hold off on approving this until we have the design review consultant component, or can we approve this as drafted?
Mayor and council, if you want to have a consultant, then I wouldn't be concerned about it. If you're having second thoughts about going to a consultant, then maybe we should not have that wording put in there. I mean, the initial draft did not have that wording reference to consultants in there, and then it was added after the fact. So we could strike that wording. We could continue this for 2 weeks. We could keep it in unless you're having second thoughts about going to a consultant. I think the council has wide discretion in that area.
So, Mr. Adams, there would not be any legal conflict or issues if we move forward with this language tonight.
No, because one option we could do, Mayor, Councilmember Jorgensen, is you could go with the third reading, you could approve the decision document. And we could just hold off on publication for 2 weeks. And because these do not become official until they're published in the statesman. So we could go through all this and just hold off on publication for 2 weeks if that would make you feel better.
Thank you very much.
Any further questions? Okay, it's a pleasure of the council.
Mr. Mayor,
Uh-huh.
I believe, I think the wording isn't so far off on this that, I believe I would feel comfortable moving forward with modifications as discussed here tonight.
Would you like to make a motion then?
Mr.
Motion,
Mayor, before I make the motion, is there any other discussion?
I would have discussion on that motion after the motion's made.
Well,
we're at a point where we can deliberate some more, or we can get a motion and second, and then we have a discussion period.
Mr. Mayor, may I ask a question?
Certainly.
Are we looking at the variance or the there was another option in here that Mr. Wadums referred to, alternative compliance.
We're not looking at alternatives compliance.
Okay, I misunderstood. I thought Ms. Thornbow had expressed a preference for that.
That'll be in a different section of code that we'll look at down the line.
Mayor, Councilmember Heller, that is correct. The variance is already in code currently.
Okay. Yeah, I was confused on that. Thank you so much.
So there's a lot to absorb here, especially if you haven't spent a lifetime looking at this stuff.
Yeah.
So, Mr. Mayor, the motion is for the third reading or for its points that I'm a little, I want to make sure we're really.
Well, if
clear.
I understood Councilmember Jorgensen, if she were to make a motion, it would be to instruct the clerk to read ordinance 102422 for the third reading, incorporating the changes in the design review required findings as discussed.
Thank you.
Did I misstate that?
No, you stated it perfectly.
And I'll second that motion.
Okay. Would you indicate for the record that that's actually the wording you want to use in your motion? Because I don't get to make motions.
Yes, Mr. Mayor. I would move to follow a motion as outlined by Mayor Evans.
Okay, thank you. I have a second. Got a second
I'll
by Councilmember Page. Okay, got a motion and seconds or further discussion?
And Mr. Mayor, can we also include in that motion to waive the required reading of the entire
Oh, no.
ordinance? Please.
Oh, okay, maker of the motion, accept the amendment to waive. Read it by title only
Yes, Mr. Mayor.
in the second.
I'll renew my second, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, thank you. Okay, motion's properly, any discussion on the motion? Okay, what clerk call roll, please?
Councilmember Jorgensen,
Yes.
Councilmember Page,
Yes.
Councilmember Heller,
Yes.
Councilmember Jacobs.
Yes.
Third reading ordinance 1024-22, an ordinance of the city of Garden City, a municipal corporation of the state of Idaho, amending or repealing Garden City Code Title 8 Development Code, Chapter 1 General Regulations, Article A Purpose, Applicability and Interpretation, Section 4 Applicability, Chapter 3 Overlay Zoning District Regulations, Article A General Provisions, Section 1 Zoning Districts Established, Section 3 Allowed Uses, Article C Sorrel Mitchell Work Live Create, Chapter 6 Administration, Article B Specific Provisions, Section 3 Design Review Committee, Section 8 Minor Planned Unit Development, Subsection 6 Allowed Uses, and Chapter 7 references Article A definitions, Section 2 definition of terms, repealing ordinance number 86707 in its entirety, repealing all ordinances or part thereof to the extent that they conflict with this ordinance, providing all other ordinances included in the official code are still in effect, notwithstanding some provisions thereof being eliminated, repealing any other official city action creating or regulating the Sorrel Mitchell Work Live Create Overlay Zoning District, providing for severability, approving a summary of the ordinance, and providing an effective date.
Thank you. And council, this will be on the agenda next time to adopt and publish only. Okay,
Mr.
Okay.
Mayor,
yes,
may we take a break?
yes, we may. We'll call a recess for a few minutes. Magic words. Thank you. We'll reconvene the meeting at 7:54.
Mr. Mayor, before we leave that agenda item, can I just make sure I understand what I'm doing with the decision document?
Okay,
Mayor,
we're on
council.
item G4, okay?
Yes, part of that is the decision document, and the reference number on that is CPA FY 2022-5. Did you want to deal with the decision document tonight?
I think the intent was, I missed that, I'm sorry. Councilmember Jorgensen, was it your intent to adopt with the third reading, adopt the decision document?
It's
Yes,
on
Mr. Mayor.
page 208 of your packet, Mayor and Councilmember Jorgensen.
Okay, so let's just do an additional motion to adopt the decision document that goes with ordinance 1024-22.
Mr. Mayor,
Yes,
I move that we adopt the decision document for ordinance number 1024-2022. Yes.
With the approval wording, Mr. Mayor, because it's written in the alternative, either approval or denial, so
Oh.
part of the motion is the approval wording.
yes.
Thank you.
Your
Yes,
intent was
with
the approval.
With the
word.
approval language.
Certain, okay. I'll second that motion. Okay, got a motion and a second. Is there any discussion on the motion to approve the decision document for ordinance 1024-22 in the affirmative? Okay, hearing no discussion, clerk call the roll.
Councilmember Page,
Yes.
Councilmember Heller,
Yes.
Councilmember Jacobs,
Yes.
Councilmember Jorgensen.
Yes.
Thank you. We'll move now to item G5. This is resolution 1129-22. Mr. Wadums?
Thank you, Mayor. Members of the council, starts on page 216 of your packet. I did not have time to do a memo, so I will just tell you verbally right now what this is all about. First of all, on section number 1 of the resolution, there's a typo. It's already been fixed in the final document. supposed to say City of Garden City, not City FF Garden City. So, City of Garden City. I don't know how that was not caught, but it's been caught after the fact by myself. So I'm going to ask that you, if you want to approve this with as amended with that clarification. And what this is some time ago, and at Mountain Home, they contract out their city attorney services. They contract out with Paul Fitzer and the firm MTSB, I think is right. They are, their business is in Garden City right down the street. They're very good attorneys. They do contract work for smaller municipalities, and they do that for Mountain Home. One of their attorneys named Paul Fitzer reached out to me some time ago and said, hey, we have a conflict of interest. Will you take on and will you be a conflict city attorney for Mountain Home? And I said, oh, do tell. And he said, the scenario is that the show band tribe wants to open up a casino in the city limits or the area of impact of Mountain Home. And so the Mountain Home wants a legal opinion from some city attorney on whether that's legal. And so I briefed that with the mayor. The mayor authorized me to look into it. And so what this agreement is, and it has not gone to Mountain Home City Council yet. So you're the first city council to look at it. So I think Paul indicated that they will probably agree to this. If they agree to it, what it says is they will pay the city of Garden City an hourly rate of $175 an hour for my review. That money would go right to the city. $175 an hour is what Paul Fitzer charges the city of Mountain Home on an hourly basis. So it'd be the same as what Mr. Fitzer charges. And so I talked to the mayor about it. The mayor said it was fine with him. And I'm just asking for the blessing of the council for Mountain Home to borrow me for a little bit and for the city to be reimbursed for my legal services for my time. So that's what this is. And I would stand for any questions. It's about whether there should be a casino in Mountain Home.
Okay, before we go to questions, just so you know administratively how I view some of these conflict cases, we get these come from time to time from various other entities. And I like having some reciprocal opportunities in my hip pocket should the necessity arise at some point. So the most common conflict is with Ada County prosecutor's office. But we've done them for Boise City. I don't know if we've done any Canyon County. So but one of the benefits is that when Charlie sends something out on the listserv to get some extra eyes on a particular issue that we might be having, we get great response. So that's the motivation, and you know, that doesn't relieve him of any of his duties here. If the plate's full, then he's going to be doing some extra work over time. But anyway, that's just wanted to let you know why I consider those kinds of things.
Thank you.
Are there any questions of Mr. Wallace?
Mr. Mayor,
Yes.
Mr. Wadums, did in discussions, did you get any idea of scope of project and what demand would be on your time?
Council President Page, I did not. The issue is just basically whether it's legal. They ask is for me to advise their city council on whether it's legal. I've since learned a little bit of details, and it's going to be interesting. I don't have a conclusion yet. I don't know if it's legal or not, but it's going to be interesting. It involves area of impact. It involves the federal government, and it involves tribal law. It involves municipal law. And I don't know what the scope in terms of my man hours are. No.
Thank you, Mr. Wadums.
Yes, of course.
Any other questions? Okay, the matter of resolution 1129-22 is before the council.
Mr. Mayor,
Yes.
I would move that we adopt resolution number 1129-22 and allow Mr. Wadums to gain more experience and build Mountain Home and generate revenue for the city.
Second. Got a motion and a second. Any discussion? Hearing none, the clerk call the roll.
Councilmember Heller,
Yes.
Councilmember Jacobs.
Yes.
Councilmember Jorgensen.
Yes.
Councilmember Page.
Yes.
Thank you. Next item on the agenda, G6. This is a public hearing item. This is resolution 1130-22, amending the billing policy that Ms. Libby is going to go through with us right now.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of the council. On page 222 of your packet is my memo kind of outlining the basis for the requested increases to the utilities. The water fund, just as a historical, we have not had an increase in the water fund since 2018, so we're coming up on year 4. At that time, there was a 5% increase. We have been able to hold increases down in the water fund a little bit better because we don't have the driving factors of expenses like we do with the sewer fund, but we are asking for an 8% increase at this time. And that's really driven by the inflationary factors and the increases in the wages and benefits for the water fund. In addition, the Public Works Department has worked diligently on putting together a capital projects plan. At this time, the estimated costs on that for the water department would be approximately $3 million. Based on the area of impact, about $1 million of that would be within the urban renewal district, and the remaining $2 million would then be on the city's water fund. Remembering that these costs are purely an estimate, we never have an actual amount until we have time for the engineering to be done and it goes out to bid. So Colin and his team, work diligently to look at those, but that $3 million would be an estimate in the water fund. And we do have those projects prioritized and we'll work towards completing them as we can. The sewer fund is really the major impact this year. And again, driven by the factor that we are an end user of the Boise City water renewal treatment system. And if you get a chance, I do encourage you to just maybe take a quick look at their plan that's online. They will be investing over the next 10 years, which is a short amount of time for a project of this magnitude, about $500 million into that facility. They did pass a bond, which will help keep the rates down for not only their users, but as well as ourselves. Our costs are driven by their costs. We have a bit of a complicated formula that we use based on the amount of material we're putting into their system and what's in that material. And they are now facing new regulations from the EPA where they are going to have to deal with the phosphorus that is showing up in the water supply. And so that will become a new factor in our cost calculation, is how much phosphorus is Garden City putting into the system. So adding another layer of complexity, they'll be increasing capacity at the facility. It is a 210-page document, as you can imagine, a city the size of Boise. But if you kind of look through it, their 10-year plan is pretty impressive. So then the city ourselves, we also have increasing costs, kind of similar to the water fund with our staffing. And then the sewer fund also has capital projections of about 10.6 million. Approximately 1.6 million will lie within the urban renewal district. We do have 2 million built in for the ARPA funding that we have received. And then the remaining 7 million will fall to the city's sewer fund. So we're looking at projections moving forward as far as getting these capital projects completed. They do help us in the long run in the sewer fund because many times they reduce what we call the infiltration of the sewer system. There's things that get into the sewer lines that get processed through the city of Boise that when we replace with a new line, there's no leakage. And so maybe our costs, maybe not say go down, but we have noticed over the years an improvement in our bills from the city of Boise because we've been able to improve that what's going into the sewer is just truly coming from the consumer and not what's seeping in from the ground. So with that, on the rate increases, I stand for any questions.
Any questions? Okay, and just in case someone online isn't aware, Garden City owns its own collection system and operates and maintains the collection system. The effluent is sent to the city of Boise's treatment plant for disposition. So by contract, the city of Boise treats what we send them. And that's the nexus here.
Correct.
And we pay our share of capital improvements and operations that they incur. So this is a public hearing item. I would open the public hearing on resolution 1130-22. There's no one here signed up to testify. Again, our technology seems to be working well. Is there anyone joining us remotely that would like to testify? Okay, I don't see anyone. Is what?
Jason.
No.
His hands up on that one.
Oh,
No, I'm sorry, that's actually the mouse.
Oh, okay.
oh. Okay,
It's the mouse.
okay. Again, I don't see anyone online wishing to testify. With that, I'll close the public hearing. Council, the matters before you for action.
Mr. Mayor, move do we adopt resolution 1130-22. Amended billing policy of the city of Garden City.
I would second that.
Got a motion and a second. Is there any discussion on the motion? Hearing none, the clerk call the roll.
Councilmember Jacobs,
Yes.
Councilmember Jorgensen,
Yes.
Councilmember Page,
Yes.
Councilmember Heller.
Yes.
Thank you. Motion carries. Next item, item G7. This is also a public hearing item on ordinance 1031-22. This is the appropriations ordinance for our 2023 budget in the amount of $23,690,840. Ms. Libby.
So thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of the council. This is identical to the tentative budget that you did pass 2 weeks ago. This would be the official adoption of the budget ordinance. Would then be published in the paper as a legal notice. Due to the timing and the requirements for the submittal of our tax levy, I would ask that you suspend the rules and adopt and publish tonight. We do have to have that levy to the state taxing district by the first week of September.
Okay, thank you. Any questions before I open the public hearing? Okay, with that, I'll open the public hearing on ordinance 1031-22. There's no one here at the meeting signed up to testify. Again, do we have anyone joining us remotely that would like to testify regarding the appropriations ordinance? Okay, seeing none, I'll close the public hearing. The matter of ordinance 1031-22 is before the council.
Mr. Mayor, I move we adopt the ordinance, adopt and publish ordinance 1031-22, the annual appropriation ordinance.
Mr. Mayor, we do need the first reading
Oh,
or the reading and then the adopted.
I'm sorry.
Sorry.
And I need to amend that. And suspend the rules to do that.
We're going to do that, but we have to read it first.
Okay,
So the first motion would be to ask the city ask the city clerk to read ordinance 1031-22 by title only.
Mr. Mayor, I move we ask the city clerk to read the ordinance 1031-22 by title only.
Second.
A motion and second. Is there discussion? Hearing none, the clerk call the roll.
Councilmember Jorgensen,
Yes.
Councilmember Page,
Yes.
Councilmember Heller,
Yes.
Councilmember Jacobs.
Yes.
Reading of ordinance 1031-22, an ordinance to be termed the annual appropriation ordinance for the fiscal year beginning October 1, 2022, appropriating the sum of $23,690,840 to defray the expenses and liabilities of the city of Garden City for said fiscal year, authorizing a levy of a sufficient tax upon the taxable property and specifying the objects and purposes for which said appropriation is made, providing for conflicts and providing for an effective date.
Thank you. Now, Councilmember Heller. You can suspend the rules, adopt and publish if you want to make that. motion.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I move we suspend the rules, adopt and publish ordinance 1031-22, the annual appropriation ordinance.
Second.
Got a motion and a second. Is there any discussion on the motion? Hearing none, will the clerk call the roll?
Councilmember Page,
Yes.
Councilmember Heller,
Yes.
Councilmember Jacobs,
Yes.
Councilmember Jorgensen.
Yes.
Great, thank you. Motion carries. That concludes the public portion of our meeting tonight. Thank you to those that have joined us remotely. We do have an executive session on the agenda. I need a code reference if that's been determined. Councilmember Page.
Mr. Mayor, I move that in accordance with Idaho Code 784-2061F, we move into executive session to communicate with legal counsel for the public agency to discuss the legal ramifications and legal options of pending litigation or controversies not yet being litigated, but eminently likely to be litigated, after which the regular city council meeting will adjourn without a decision.
Thank you. Do I have a second?
Second.
Okay, thank you. Got a motion second with the clerk call roll.
Councilmember Heller,
Yes.
Councilmember Jacobs,
Yes.
Councilmember Jorgensen,
Yes.
Councilmember Page.
Yes.
Great, thank you. We'll say goodnight to those that have joined us remotely. And then we'll enter into executive session.